you're in the right place. This is the Eatfluencer Podcast, and I'm your host, Dr. Maggie Landis. Together, we are going to unpack everything about eating and discover the what, when, and how that will let you lead your best life. This is not your doctor's conversation about nutrition. Today is when you can start to love eating again. Let food be food and you be you. Get ready to get eatfluenced. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Eatfluencer Podcast. It's Maggie Landis here. We are getting into episode 79, the danger of 12-step programs for food addiction. And I have a guest today that I'm going to introduce in a minute. I want to take just a moment to let you know about a new project that I've been working on behind the scenes that is now active and ready for you. I get asked more than anything else, what do I do about my doctor? What about when my doctor says I need to lose weight? What about fill in the blank? This thing I heard at the doctor or heard some doctor say or whatever. And this whole notion that your size determines your health. And I know that's a notion because many doctors say that and act as if that were true, but that's weight stigma. That's weight stigma in the practice of medicine. And I'm going to start really digging in deep on how to unpack that specific problem. And I'm doing this through a series of monthly workshops, live workshops. Yes, they're live. Yes, there's also a replay if you can't make the date and time, or if you're in another part of the world and it's, the middle of the night or something. And I'm starting next week. June 16th is going to be the very first one. The series is called Talk with a Doc. I'm the doc. How do you like that? And this first one, we're talking about dealing with doctors when everything is always about weight. Because that is just, I'm starting there because that is hands down the most common concern that people have, that they bring to me at least. So we're going to be talking about, what about when the doctor says I have to lose weight? Do I really have to get on the scale? Do I really have to be confrontational about this? Like, how else can I advocate for myself at the doctor? How do I pick a doctor? How do I, sort of discern what advice is good and what's not good? And, that all these sorts of things, because the point is, my goal is to keep people going to doctors, because when you don't access any health care, that's bad. That's bad for you as an individual. That's bad for us as a community. But until we can change the narrative in the health culture, you're going to have to deal with these doctors that very much are practicing in a weight-focused way. So that's the kind of stuff we're going to talk about. There's lots of details on my website. There is an opportunity to submit your questions ahead of time so I can answer them even if you can't be on the call. It is a paid opportunity, but there are pay what you can discount codes available if that is really a problem for you. The link is in the show notes, and it's got everything you need. I hope you're able to join me for this first session that's next Thursday, June 16th. If you're listening to this episode later, after June 16th has already occurred, then make sure you go to my website, maggielandismd.com, and I'm doing this monthly, so you should be able to catch up with whatever month it is and see how you can get involved. Okay, so today's episode. Now, I'm going to give a big, huge, major, capital red, boldface warning. My guest and I today are going to be talking in some detail about some eating disorder behaviors and some very disordered and harmful experiences that she had while she was participating in a 12-step recovery food addiction program with an eating disorder. All right. So there's a lot of detail and personal experience, which I don't always have on this podcast. This is not a science-y, psychology episode. This is a personal lived experience episode. If you are in a place in your own relationship with food or eating disorder recovery that is going to be very challenging for you to hear, now is the time to log off and join me again next Wednesday. All right. But Karin Pitcairn, is a nutrition therapy practitioner who works now in a non-diet approach. But she didn't start there. And she has a very interesting personal story of participating in a food addiction recovery program. This is like a 12-step program. Y'all have heard of 12-step programs for alcoholism and drugs and things like that. This is a 12-step program for food addiction. Now, I have done a whole entire podcast episode. I'd have to look back to see the number, but I've already talked in sort of scientific detail about food addiction and how I do not believe food addiction is a real entity that we need to concern ourselves with. But this was like a complete jaw-dropping experience to hear about the programming from the inside, because number one, I had no idea this stuff even existed. And Karin participated a long, long time ago, but this stuff is still active and going on right now. And there are vulnerable women signing up for programs like this probably today. Number two, I had no idea what was going on in there, that the danger and the vulnerability and the real harm being done inside these programs. So Karin, as my expert, is kind of going to be sharing her story with us and her lived experience in this program. And as I mentioned, Karin is also in recovery from bulimia. And so there's a lot of personal details that may be sensitive to some of you. But I want you to, if you're able to listen to this episode, to think of it in the lens of compassion for the people in the year 2022 that are still signing up for programs like this, because our cultural narrative is that small is better, small is more valued, small is virtuous, and it is a really a move out of desperation to join a program very much like the one that Karin is going to be talking about today. So we're talking about, quote, abstinence from food. We're talking about spirituality. We're talking about the behaviors, the really poorly supervised nutrition advice that was being given out, the complete lack of eating disorder screening. I mean, it's a scary space. So this is more of an awareness piece to know that we haven't fixed this culture until stuff like this stops. So please enjoy this episode and know that Karin now is recovered from this. And let me read you a bio real quick about the awesome stuff she does, because she, this, like I said, this is a lived experience episode, but she's also got now lots of professional opportunities to serve. She is the owner of Reframe Your Wellness and is a nutrition therapy practitioner, certified mind-body eating coach, and also a Pilates teacher with over 20 years of experience in the fitness industry. She's a diet culture dropout, recovered over-exerciser, chronic dieter who is in recovery from bulimia and body image issues. She lives outside of Philadelphia with her husband, her daughter, her two dogs, and she says she is a perpetual student of life, fascinated by learning about all things regarding the body, its functions, and how to best support it. All right, with no more introduction, here's the conversation with Karin. All right, welcome, Karin. Thank you for joining me on the podcast today.
Oh, thank you so much, Maggie. Thanks for having me.
Well, you are very welcome. There's so many things compelling about what you do professionally, but the real reason that I wanted to have you on today is we're going to talk a little bit about this idea of food addiction. Mm-hmm. Now, I have done a podcast talking about how, honestly, I don't believe that you can be addicted. I'm doing there's gonna be a lot of air quotes that people can't see in this episode, but I've talked about food addiction in terms of, there's really not good science that I can see that supports it being an addiction. And this whole, the rat model with the sugar and the cocaine that everybody talks about, it only worked when the rats were starving. And anyway, we're not going to talk about all that neuroscience stuff.
Right.
I've already done that, but you have an experience that I honestly, personally have not met anybody that has been in one of these food addiction recovery type programs, like 12-step programs
Mhm.
for food addiction.
Yeah.
And, you did this 20 years ago, I think, roughly, and we're participating in that for quite a long time. And now work in the anti-diet space as a nutrition therapy practitioner. And clearly those two things, like there was some sort of transformation that happened. But what I want to talk about is how damaging perpetuating this food addiction model is to individuals. Like the fact that it's kind of scientifically incorrect is one thing, but the fact that we are basically these programs, the more you told about the program to me, I was like, it sounds like an eating disorder training program, basically.
Absolutely.
So I would like for you to share a little snapshot for people that aren't even familiar with, like, how does this work? Like if you go online and you sign up, and by the way, there's several of these programs out there. People are familiar with maybe Overeaters Anonymous. There's also a food, what's it called? Food Addicts Anonymous. There's a food, what's the other one called? Food
Addicts in Recovery Anonymous.
Food Addicts. Yeah. And there might be more. There's probably more, but essentially they all operate basically under the same idea that this addiction is something you have to release and break free of and cure yourself of. And there's a lot of really problematic sort of, I don't know, psychology in that. But I want to hear from your perspective, what prompted you to join when you did, like, and this was like years and years ago, but if you can, I'm sure you can recall very clearly. And then like your first touch point, you sign up, you go, probably back then we were doing like in-person stuff. You didn't have like Zoom meetings or anything, but
Zoom wasn't even around. No.
So what was like your first impression? The first I mean, you obviously saw this as a solution, right? I mean, because it's pretty big commitment to join something like this.
It's huge. I mean, and I think that for me, I was just really in that place. I was so desperate. I was bulimic. I had been, which started out from a diet. I was a statistic, I started out dieting, and that led to restricting, and then that led to binging, and it led to over exercising and laxatives and diet pills, and finally full-blown purging. And I think that I was so desperate because my life had been so out of control for so long. And I just wanted a solution. I just wanted it to stop. I wanted to stop being obsessed with food, about my body, about weight. And I looked online and I found this program. It was a 12-step program. I was living out in California at the time, and they had a meeting that night. And I went in, and my first impression was I felt like I had found my solution. There were women that, there were women that were my age, that were happy, that were saying how amazing their lives were. And they were all in very thin bodies. And I knew, and they felt like they had freedom from food. And that was what I wanted.
Right. Now, at the time, did you recognize that, like, let me say this another way. Did you recognize that you had bulimia at the time? I mean, I know now you can say I had bulimia, but
yes,
you recognized you had an eating disorder.
Yeah.
And was mentioning that or acknowledging that like any part of the registration or intake process for this, or you just show up at this meeting?
You show up at the meeting, and somebody offers to be your sponsor who is abstinent from flour and sugar, and they have their 3 weighted measured meals a day. I mean, there's an entire program of, what you need to do in order to be considered abstinent. And somebody will offer, you raise your hand if you're a newcomer, and somebody will come up to you and offer to be your sponsor. So there's no like initial intake. All you need is to be willing.
To be willing. Okay. So there's a lot to unpack in what you just said, but the whole premise of these programs essentially is it's modeled after, AA or NA or any of the, substance abuse type 12-step programs where abstinence is absolute. And you obviously can be abstinent absolutely from drugs or alcohol or whatever, because that's not required for life. So explain a little bit about this concept of what, in their terms, abstinent from food means, because to me that just already is like super shady.
Yeah. So in the beginning of the meeting, they kind of go through this whole thing where they explain what they do. And it's 3 weighed and measured meals, no flour, no sugar, no eating in between those meals, because they believe that flour and sugar sets up an uncontrollable craving within your mind to either overeat or restrict certain foods. And they believe that by abstaining from those foods, along with working the 12 steps, that they will be able to be cured.
Right. So the meal,
Someday.
there's a meal plan, or like a food plan or meal, whatever you want to call it, that's very restrictive and very rigid. Like, besides the fact that we've now just globally eliminated sugar and flour, you don't even have total freedom outside of that. Right. It's not
No,
like you can just go to the produce section and like go crazy or anything. You still have very structured. I mean, even before we started recording this, you mentioned to me like, well, you can only eat 1 vegetable at a time. Like, you can't eat 2 vegetables like together or
yeah,
something. I mean,
yeah. Or you weren't able to eat like specific foods because somewhere along the line, somebody had some type, they were either triggered or had a reaction. And yeah, so you
right.
couldn't
And
have.
who creates the meal plan? The sponsors or?
Yeah. So originally, the 2 founders of FA were people in OA, and I guess they couldn't get abstinent or stay abstinent in OA, and they decided to leave OA and take the food plan and make a bunch of modifications to it, and put a lot of rules in it, and started FA. And so the food plan is really what's been passed down from the sponsor before you. Typically, they eat similarly. So
Yeah.
that's
And
what
is there anywhere along the line? I want to just make sure it's clear. The sponsors are basically people that have participated and had some, sort of continuity in their participation and quote success, whatever
yeah,
that looks like. So they're
back to
not
back abstinence for 6 months.
right. Okay. So they're people that are like really, really good at playing the game with this group, right? It's not, they're not people that they're not necessarily, they probably mostly are not dietitians or
Right.
medical providers or nutritionists or nothing like that. These are just regular, like, lay people who participate in the program, and then after a certain amount of time are sort of designated to supervise other people. Am I saying that right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, that's scary as heck.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So what is, like, okay, so you went to the first meeting. Let's go back in time here. So you go to the first meeting, you think, I found my people. Look at all these thin, happy people, because that's what we all want to be, right? Thin and happy. So sign me up. So you start participating. And then what's going through your mind once you're kind of in the weeds, like having to eat these structured meals, weighing your food, zero flexibility, like where does that take you and your bulimia?
Yeah. So I think that's a great question. I mean, I think that in the beginning I was relieved because I was so consumed with just being in my eating disorder. And I remember like a few months into it saying to myself, like, I want to be able to rely on my hunger cues and my fullness cues to tell me when to eat and when to stop eating. And I don't want to have to rely on a food scale to tell me what to eat. And I would say early on, I always kind of had it in the back of my mind that this wasn't going to be a forever thing. It was going to be a stepping stone for me.
Mm-hmm. Is that how they frame it too? Like, in general, do they say like, okay, you're going to get through this program and be healed, or whatever their language is, and then you're done with it? Or do they kind of, is their expectation that this is like, you're like a lifer in
Oh,
this?
you're a lifer. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's people in there that, 30 years that they've been in there weighing and measuring their food. And yeah.
I bet they're fun at parties. Yeah. Golly. I mean, I really feel, I feel sorry for somebody that is that, I don't know, swindled or really just blinded to the idea that like, this may not actually be a really healthy and productive manner of handling your relationship with food, because it certainly sounds to me like this would accelerate any even little hint of an eating disorder in somebody. This is not this like the antithesis of eating disorder treatment, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah. And you are spot on when you say that, because what happened is, I know we've talked about this before, but like the Minnesota starvation experiment where, people were becoming in FA, like we were becoming like obsessed with either like chewing gum or drinking carbonated beverages in between or drinking coffee in between our meals in order to maintain our fullness. Or if we were allowed to have like one piece of fruit at a meal, we were shopping for the biggest apple that we could find.
And cutting it up in little itty bitty pieces, like
last forever.
eating disorder style. Yeah. I mean, and there's a lot of gaslighting. I mean, that's kind of a newer word, but that's really describes this idea of like telling people that you are your own problem. And
yeah, or it was your disease. Well, the reason why you're thinking about food in between your meals is because you have a disease. And for every day, I remember this saying, like for every day that you're abstinent, your disease is out in the parking lot doing push-ups. And that really stayed with me for so long, because I felt like if I were to leave, that my disease would be so strong that it would consume me.
yeah, well, there's a lot of, and I looked up, okay, I did a little, pre-reading for this episode. And one of these organizations, let me see if I can find what I did. They had these quotes on their website, which was just horrifying. It said, let's see here. If you fail to plan, you have planned to fail. Okay. I mean, and that to me is just pointing the finger at somebody who's basically hungry. I mean, you're really denying your own like biology.
Right. Right. And you're being told that it's not you that wants it. It's your disease. It's because you're a food addict. That's why you want to eat in between meals. Well, no, maybe because you're being underfed and undernourished and you're legitimately hungry. I mean, there were women that had, lost their periods for a number of years, not just months, a number of years. They weren't menstruating because of the diet that they were consuming. And it didn't seem to bother them because they were in thin bodies.
Yeah. Now, see, that is interesting. Was everybody in a thin body? I mean, at this point, you're basically like, what would happen if somebody in a large body showed up at one of these meetings? Or did that just never happen in your experience?
No, it totally did. And they got really thin. Yeah. Yeah. By following the food plan. I mean, the good part is that there's support, it's a community, and all of a sudden it's like the life that you had before program kind of didn't exist because you're so taken in by, everybody. They're so nice and so welcoming. And then before you know it, they're like your new best friends and you start doing everything with them. So, and everybody's doing the same thing.
Right. Well, and this is like a extreme, like kind of cult mentality that, you can't interact with people in the outside. You can't, and you definitely are kind of isolated like that. If you have to weigh and measure and eat this really specific stuff, like you're not going out to lunch with your coworkers, you're not going to the neighborhood barbecue. I mean, obviously that stuff is totally off limits. And so it breeds that isolation piece, which, is a big problem for eating disorder patients.
Yeah. Well, you could go out to eat, and there were certain restaurants that were, that supported your abstinence, but it was almost like either you were terrified that there was going to be, even though you would tell the server, like, no flour, no sugar, I have an allergy. And so you were scared that what they were putting in the food, that it was going to affect you somehow. Or two, you were kind of looking to eat more when you go out to eat because you're not eating enough at these meals.
Right. Well, yeah. And so that's interesting. You measure this. You would tell servers at these, I'm sure you went out infrequently, but when you did, you'd tell them you have an allergy to sugar, right? So, and that's what they instructed you to tell, basically.
Yeah, I mean, that's basically what they say in the beginning. Like, we have an allergy to flour and sugar, which sets up, I forget the language, but it's like it sets up an uncontrollable urge to continue to eat.
Oh, for Pete's sake. I mean, really, it is so horrifying that, I mean, you think about the level of kind of desperation that an individual must be at. I'm sure that's probably what you felt at the time when you signed up. You're like,
Definitely.
I'll do anything,
Mhm.
like anything. And this is really taking anything to an extreme,
Yeah.
I would say. So now what about another thing we talked about is, there seem to really expose this is very scientific, and this is your brain, and this is a disease, and this is, a biochemical thing in your brain that's making you be a food addict and stuff. But if you ask any questions that are, just kind of investigating the reasoning for something, like, if you're just sort of doing that, like, very scratch the surface kind of science, like, why can't I eat two vegetables on the same plate? What's the reason for that? What was the answers that you got when, or anybody would ask?
Yeah, it was basically like, let's just keep it simple. Let's keep it simple.
Is that totally
Yeah.
gaslighting or what? It's like, you're total, what that would be? That would be in a courtroom. What do they say? The judge is like, get back. And when the lawyers start doing that weird stuff where they start answering different questions than the question that's asked, and you're like, no,
No.
they don't really accept any kind of questioning.
No. It's, I mean, I remember the philosophy when I was in it, and it was, why is not a spiritual question. It's all about just acceptance.
And because the spirituality is very woven into this. Because
Yeah.
I know
and
that in 12-step programs, that's part of the
Yeah.
deal, right?
Yeah, that was actually one of the things that I really loved about the program, because I feel like I found my spirituality in there. So that was a gift. And there were
Like,
gifts.
please God, give me food.
Right.
Oh,
And eventually
yeah.
we did.
Right. Oh gosh. But yeah, that's really like woven into the fabric of these 12-step programs.
Yeah. Is to have a higher power outside of yourself. And it doesn't necessarily have to be God. It could be, whatever you want it to be.
Right. But you're supposed to accept that these things are out of your control, essentially, and that your repentance for your disease or whatever, I don't know I don't even know how to say it. It's so weird. I'm
It's
stumbling
just
on my
throwing your
words
hands
because
up
it
in
is
the air.
right.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
you have this sponsor person who's, telling you what to eat, telling you what to think. All your social connections are now in this group because you've essentially had to almost isolate yourself from your previous life. And so how did this pan out for you? Because you stayed with the program for years, you said, right?
Yeah, I was in there. I mean, I guess in the grand scheme of things, because it's still going on, it was just a little snapshot, but 3.5 years. I stayed abstinent the whole time. I mean, I know people that had been in the program for years and just was never able to get abstinent, but 3.5 years.
And what are you at the time, if you can remember what you were thinking in terms of, I've got an eating disorder and this program, are you feeling like the program is helping you recover from your eating disorder? Or are you thinking like, yeah, I'm a better bulimic because I have all these, even more rules and more, like, did you think it was helping at the time?
Looking back, I don't even think that was on my radar. I feel like in today's world, if I were doing that now, it would definitely be on my radar, because I feel like 20 years ago, like, diet culture wasn't really as known as
Oh
it
yeah,
is
no.
today, right?
Yeah, I don't think we really use that word because it was
Right.
just normal. We just called it eating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it wasn't even really on my radar. Like, how is this really helping me long term? I knew that I wasn't binging and purging. I had I had freedom that I thought around food. I felt like I was neutral, but I was still kind of hungry from time to time, but I pushed it aside.
Right. Well, and that's the whole idea, is that they give you this really prescriptive
Mhm.
thing to follow, and there is zero flexibility. There is zero accounting for how the human body has like really dynamic needs.
From day to
And
day.
oh, from hour to hour.
Hour to
Yeah,
hour, yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
Right. And it's a very, very much like a one size fits all kind of operation.
Yeah.
Oh, so okay, so let's get you out of this program. So finally, how did you come to the realization that I don't think belong here for my whole life? Like, this is not,
Yeah.
where was the end point?
The end point was just, I was working my second AWOL, which is a closed group where you work the 12 steps. It stands for a way of life. And I was halfway through that one. And I was just like, I'm done. I feel like I'm really ready to leave. And it was a process because I felt like I talked about it a little bit and then I wouldn't do it. And then finally I just ripped the Band-Aid off.
And when you said you felt like you were ready to leave, was that like a victorious, like, I'm ready to leave because I've done it right and I win and I'm out? Or is it like an angry, like, I'm
No.
ready to leave, this is baloney, like, get me out? Like,
Not at all. No, I felt like I was really ready for my next chapter.
uh-huh.
I knew that I really wanted to try to trust myself. And that, I think, was the biggest thing that wasn't addressed when I was in program, was really my ability to trust myself.
Right. Well,
And
and
I wanted to
that's,
dip my toe in the water.
yeah. Well, and so now, fast forward, and a lot of time has elapsed since then, but you have gone back to NTA to become a nutrition therapy practitioner, and you really do sort of practice and believe in the intuitive eating model and the non-restrictive. I mean, that's like a 180.
Total 180. Yeah. And I really think that, even when I was in FA, like I found that helping people was really, like, I got into personal training and I found that helping people was really what I ultimately wanted to do. So, fast forward to years later and going through the Nutritional Therapy Association and really helping people get to like the root cause of their physical problems. But going through now, I'm going to be in May, a mind body eating coach. And that was just like the, no pun intended, but the icing on the cake with
Right.
that, because it's really about the emotional part too. And the physical, both of them go hand in hand.
Right. And recognizing that really this relationship with food is a completely personalized, individualized experience,
Totally.
which is the antithesis of one size fits all. You have to eat these many grams of protein or whatever. And just, yeah, that is, I mean, it's amazing to me, like how far you've come and how much, like, you've really seen really, truly both sides of this
Yeah.
coin.
Yeah. And it could be really ugly. I mean, just like when we were talking before, it's like, I wanted to talk to the people that were in those rooms, that feel like they're too afraid to leave because of what will happen. And they feel stuck. Like, I totally get, where they are, but they don't have to live like that if they have this voice inside of them that's saying like, they want that, what's on the outside.
Right. So what is the fear? Because I know that you mentioned that before, that the program sort of breeds this fear of the outside, whatever that looks like. What's going to happen? Like, what's sort of like the worst? What is there to fear? Like in their minds,
Yeah, I mean, if you leave, you could relapse and you could, gain all of your weight back and you could fall into a depression. And that's exactly what happened to me. I mean, my eating disorder, and I think because it was so numbers focused when we were in there, it was, all about what you were weighing your food, weighing your body. When you were initially in the program, like you would weigh once a month while you were losing your weight, and then it would be weekly weigh-ins. And then if, you kind of crept up, you'd talk to your sponsor about, maybe adjusting your food plan. I remember my sponsor took grains away at dinner, and then I like swore off, I will never have grains at dinner again because I thought that it would make me gain weight.
Yeah.
But it didn't
Oh,
do anything for body image. Like that's
well,
the thing.
no, of
You
course, because
feed into it.
yeah, body image is actually very much independent of your appearance or size of your body.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
and we know that now. But and so I can just imagine. I mean, my heart is breaking because I'm imagining these extremely thin, amenorrheic, starving women all in this room together talking about, having to admit to the group that they, let God down because they ate grapes last week or something. Like it sounds crazy, but I can see how in that very desperate headspace
Yeah.
that it was a community.
Yeah.
And it was a community of people that kind of had the same belief system, like a bunch of very warped ideas about food and stuff, but you had a common experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so that's probably what I would imagine. And the fear factor like kept people participating for like you said there's people that have been in there for decades. The thing is still active. I looked on their website.
Yeah.
They have a very active website. There's 6,000 locations of meetings, like, now in 2022. I mean, it's not something that I think we hear a lot about. I don't, like I said, I had not met anybody who participated in one of these. I'm not sure they're quite as kind of headline as they were maybe 20 years ago, but they're out there. And there are really probably attracting the people that are the least equipped to navigate that kind of environment.
Right, right. And you would think just with diet culture being so prevalent nowadays that there would be that little voice in their mind saying like, but wait, is this kind of like another diet? And in a way it is, but then you have all that support, with you. So
Yeah, it's a
it can
diet.
be
Let's be
tricky
clear. It's a
navigating.
diet, but it's a diet, and it's, anything where you can't get a straight answer on why something is required or why something is sort of an edict, like, that makes me really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I mean, that's sort of like makes me uncomfortable when I take my car to get repaired and they're like, well, you need this such and such a belt replaced, and I'm like, well, why? And
Right.
if they're like, oh, let's just keep it simple and you give me your MasterCard, like I would like right? We wouldn't like accept that as an answer. Like we sort of like we deserve evidence in our brains because we're
Yeah.
not dummies. But yeah, I'm just feeling like it's probably the most vulnerable people that are the ones that show up at the doorstep of these programs.
Yeah.
Because somebody like me or you now, if we showed
Right.
up, we'd be like, oh, heck no. Like we'd last 5 minutes and we'd be like right back out in the parking lot. But
Right. And I did go back actually at one point when I was in my relapse and I was like,
uh-huh.
I can't do this. I
Yeah,
can't do
you had a
this.
little more sense. Well, I'm very glad that you have sort of found
Thank you.
I don't want to say recovery because I don't believe that food addiction is a thing. I don't believe
Right.
overeating is a disease. I do believe bulimia is a disease. And I'm glad you
Absolutely.
are recovered from that.
Thank
And,
you.
that is just, that's really, really scary as a medical doctor, to know that there's patients with eating disorders in these programs that are getting more support for their eating disorder than they are for their eating disorder recovery.
Right, right. And also like for people that have weight to lose, like they may be going to their doctors and their doctors are just giving them extra praise because they're seeing the weight come off.
Oh
So it's
yeah.
almost like, then you have that whole element too, right?
Oh girl, that's a whole other podcast. But yeah, well, yeah, because a lot, I mean, the weight stigma in the health profession is my little bee in my bonnet. And a
Yeah.
lot of people, if they've lost weight, if they are in a large body and they've lost weight, they are universally congratulated
Yeah.
by medical professionals and social, acquaintances alike. And nobody even bothers to ask, like, what the heck is going on that you're starving and eating 900 calories a day and you have had no period for 2 years. And like, no, if you don't ask, it's really, you have to ask the right question because people with eating disorders it is like a mental health condition. It is a psychiatric diagnosis. They don't just walk in and say, oh yeah, well, the reason I've lost weight is because I'm a bulimic. Like, they hear praise, and all that does is just intensify those feelings of like, oh, I'm doing so good, I might as well just double down on my,
Right.
restriction or behavior or whatever it is, because look, I want to make these people happy and proud. Yeah, all the things. Yowzers. Okay. Well, I wanted to do this episode because as soon as I had talked to you, we thought about other ideas because you have a lot of expertise in this diet culture, anti-diet culture realm. But I was like, wait a minute. We got to talk about this food addiction program, because this is the stuff nightmares are made of.
Yeah, I wanted to shine the light on that a little bit, especially for people that are in there and struggling.
Yeah. So if you are feeling like you are struggling, listen, I'm going to put in the show notes for the podcast, I'm going to put the National Eating Disorder Association's hotline number and all that stuff. Going to a 12-step program where they teach you how to worsen your eating disorder and tell you that your brain is broken because you're starving, that's not gonna help. That is, and if you're feeling vulnerable and feeling desperate that's your only solution, like, please don't go there. That's crazy. I just, they're harming people. That's what bothers me. It's like, I do believe in autonomy, and if you want to weigh and measure your food every day, anybody's welcome to do that if they feel so. But to take these really vulnerable, mentally sick, individuals, put them in a program where they are shamed for trying to respond to their bodies, like desperate attempts to, like, I need nutrition. Yeah. Like, of course you're craving sugar because your freaking body is like,
your brain
is like trying to eat itself. Yeah. I mean, it's not, but then, nobody mentions that that's like physiology. They mention that that's your fault
because you're a food addict.
You're a food addict. Yeah. And so you got to stay in our program. Yeah. There are other options. And I hope that Karin has, at least shed a light on that. I'm not here to just, make a big joke of it, because I think it's scary, frankly, that there's still active groups like this. And I don't know what the age, do you have to be 18 to do this, or do they like have teenagers going to these things? Do you know?
I'm not sure. I mean, I don't know. I think that you can, like with a parent, especially if a parent brings a child in, then.
Yeah. Oh, because it's just so scary. Because, when you have a immature nervous system that, children and teenagers have, and you add that on top of a starving nervous system, on top of a eating disorder nervous system, on top, I mean, every level of
it just still has a chance to grow and mature, right?
Yeah. Yikes. Yeah. Okay. Well, so we've given very clear instructions not to join a 12-step food addiction program, but what can people do? So tell people where they can find you and what kind of work you do now to help people.
So I am on Instagram at Reframe Your Wellness, or you can go to my website, email me at Karin, Karin at reframeyourwellness.com. Right now, I am a nutritional therapy practitioner that helps women really heal from their root cause symptoms. So if you're experiencing any type of symptoms as far as digestion related, hormonal related, energy level, that could be due to blood sugar dysregulation. And then just like I said earlier, like adding in that layer with mind body nutrition is really where it brings that emotional component in as well.
Yes. And you do all of this in a non-diet approach,
individual. Everybody is looked at as their own person, their situation. Yeah, there's no diet.
Right, no diet, and really not a diet. Not like the no diet in the food addicts no diet. They are a diet.
Right.
This is like actually. Yeah. And it's not a weight loss program. It's not anything like that. This is
No.
really about health. I mean, supporting
It's
health.
about health and really learning how to come back into your body and reconnect to your body again. I think that a lot of times, especially when we go through emotional things, that we abandon our body and we lose trust in ourselves. So it's really about kind of coming back, bringing that awareness back in, bringing joy back in as well. I think that a lot of us, especially if we come from a history of like chronic dieting, like we've really taken the joy out of like food and eating together.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Cause it's way more than just nutrition. I mean, honestly, and I say this all the time, I'm like, if the only reason we ate food was to satisfy our nutritional and energy requirements, some really smart scientist would have already made like a little pill and we would all wake up and swallow it and then get on with our day. Cause that would save a lot of time and effort to not go grocery shopping and prepare food if we didn't need it for any other reason. But
Right.
there's so much more to it. And yeah, making food fun again and making health like accessible.
And being relaxed about it, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Cause there's no relaxed in diet culture. Everything is being judged and,
Yeah.
the self-judgment, shamed. Yeah. Ugh, all that. Well, thank you for sharing your time with us today. And I will put your your Instagram link and your website in the show notes so everybody can find Karin and see the good work that she's doing now.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Maggie.
Absolutely. Whew, big exhale. That is really a powerful story that Karin had to share today. And I love how far circle she's come and that now she's able to serve people professionally in a completely different capacity and really be the person that she probably wishes she was able to work with when she got, trapped in one of these very desperate and vulnerable places and joined a 12-step food addiction recovery program that really set her back. So I'm leaving all of Karin's information in the show notes so you can find her easily. And in the show notes also will be a link to my workshop, Talk with the Doc, next week. We are dealing with doctors when everything comes to weight. So I hope that I'll see you there and you enjoyed this episode. We'll talk next week on the Eatfluencer podcast. Thank you so much for being here today. If you love what you've learned, follow me on social media at Maggie Landis MD and you'll never miss a thing. You can also check out my website at maggielandismd.com and sign up to be part of our community of eaters. Thanks again for stopping by. We'll talk again soon.